presentation of what's going on in Canada. I did a presentation yesterday, but I'm just going to go through the last 4 slides and then talk about some aspects as it relates to financial regulation. So I do have the full presentation online, which I can provide you, or I can give it through Julian. And first of all, I want to talk about this notion of the Pan-Canadian Trust Framework. In Canada, we are 14 separate jurisdictions, 13 provinces and territories, and 1 federal government. We don't have a national identity program per se, nor is there any intention to have a national identity program, but we want to harmonize our regulations, our legislation, and also the programs that register individuals and provide identity for individuals for provincial and territorial programs. So we have developed what we are calling the Pan-Canadian Trust Framework. It is a set of concepts and definitions and rules which everyone is agreeing to abide by. What we did was we defined the concept of trusted digital identity in 3 component parts, with a 4th part underpinning. The first one is identity assurance. Is it a real person? Are you a real person born in Canada, or a newcomer to Canada as an immigrant or as a permanent resident? Are you the same person when you're presenting yourself at an office, whether presenting your paper documents or your digital credentials? Are you the same person as that real person? And then the 3rd part is around consent. Have you provided consent in providing your identity information, your name, your date of birth, and perhaps some more information related to a particular program? Underneath that is what we're calling the Pan-Canadian Trusted Supporting Infrastructure. It's not a single system. In other countries, they typically have a single identity system. We see what we're calling an ecosystem, or a set of systems working across the country. Each province will have one, and there may be others provided by industry. We want this all to work together toward the benefit of the individual. How we see the ecosystem emerging in Canada: again, no one single identity program or no one single national identity capability. We see the provinces and territories setting up their own programs, and we also see other programs from outside of the country, the European Union, for example. We will also see other programs that are coming about with the banks and with the telcos, and we want that all to work together from the point of view of the individual, whether they're transacting, doing payments, it could be social media, whether they're traveling, or whether they're applying for benefits, whether that's federal or provincial benefits. We have ready, which is just about to go live in a couple of weeks, is My Alberta Digital Identity, the province of Alberta. We've assessed them. Again, I'm from the Government of Canada, responsible for the federal government programs. We've done a formal assessment, and we will be accepting their trusted digital identities. What that means is that if they've proven themselves within the jurisdiction, we don't have to do that federally. We may have to do some processes to make sure it maps to the right person within our program, but we no longer have to do the identity proofing. And that's the real value of the Pan-Canadian Trust Framework, and that's the real value to Canadians. We are also in discussions with our Department of Finance on how this will apply to especially know your client regulations, or proceeds of crime, anti-money laundering, terrorist financing. We worked with finance several years back to actually put in some amendments in the legislation or the regulations to allow for digital equivalents, and literally those amendments are being published tomorrow, I believe. At a high level, again, this is a very complicated picture, but this is the trust framework assessment process. It is very rigorous. This is what I am doing from the point of view of as an analyst for the Government of Canada, assessing a provincial program and assessing what we're calling trusted digital identity. We have these trusted processes with a whole series of conformance criteria. We have qualifiers, levels of assurance, so on and so forth. and we have an assessment process, a certification, and an acceptance process that a province will go through. That's it for that presentation. I thought I would just show you very quickly some more working level decks. We just published our recommendation draft just a week ago, and these are just some working slides just to show what we're doing with the Pan-Canadian Trust Framework. The characteristics is that we want to create a very simple and integrated framework. It works not only for public services in the public sector, but we see it being used for regulatory purposes as well for Know Your Client. It could be used for health. It could also be used for passport and international travel. We're making sure that it's technology agnostic. We know that this is going to evolve over time, or technologies are going to evolve, and we want to be able to capitalize on that. We want to complement existing frameworks. And fourth, have very clear links to applicable policy, regulation, and legislation. As I said at the beginning of the presentation, we don't have a national program, we don't have a national regulation. We have a series of regulations and legislation across the different jurisdictions, but we want to be able to harmonize that. And then finally, we want to normalize or standardize key processes in identity management so that while they may be carried out with different technologies in different provinces and territories, we can after we've done an assessment, we can look to see how we can actually strengthen that from a national or a Canadian point of view. I'll just go here. So the initial use cases for the trust framework: trusted digital identity of people. First and foremost, you need to know who you're dealing with. We're also working on trusted digital identity of organizations, and then what we're calling trusted digital relationships between people, like guarantor relationships, parent relationships, and also relationships between people and organizations, such as beneficial ownership. So we're exploring that as we speak, but the focus has been on trusted digital identity of persons. And again, here's the trusted digital representations that we formalized in the trust framework. We see a fourth one coming along around assets, like with virtual currencies, virtual assets. It's not incorporated yet, but we see that's something that we will need to incorporate into the trust framework. I think the last thing I'll show you is this is where the rubber hits the road. This is where the real work takes place, is again with our trust framework. It is like a very detailed policy framework, a regulatory framework. We have a trusted process definitions. I'm just working on making the sheet so it automatically translates into the language of choice. And I just put this into Spanish for the benefit for you. This is using Google Translate. I don't know if it's correct or not, but it gives you a sense of the detail. And then we have what are called the assessment conformance criteria for each of these processes, which then we do an assessment to actually assess the province or territory. Again, I'll just close. Like, we are trying to create an ecosystem that works for Canadians. That was the picture that I showed you here. We want it to work for not only for public services, but also for all the very many different contexts that individuals are involved with: financial, banking, healthcare, travel. And we're trying to come up with one system, or not a system, but one approach that we can actually integrate all of these capabilities together for the benefit of the individual. So I will leave it at that. Again, my goal here today was simply to familiarize you with what we're doing in Canada. There's lots more to come. We have finalized our recommendation draft. We'll be translating that. We have the new regulations, which will be coming out shortly. There's a lot of good stuff going on in Canada. I also understand that Mexico is part of the Digital 9 nations, and I know that the countries met in Portugal just a few days ago, and I believe there's another meeting in Uruguay happening in November. So if there's an opportunity that we can work through the Digital 9, there's a digital identity working group, that would be great. So I will leave it at that and hand it over to the presenters. So thank you very much.